education that is more difficult to overcome than even job training. So besides taking care of the initial problems, I really think that the unemployment has had impact on kids going to school. It's had impact on people not taking care of themselves physically. And you know, the other things that have to go on, we have to make certain that our kids understand the value of education and that their parents realize that what we used to call you have to get a high school diploma no longer applies if kids want to have even the same standard of living that technology and research and development has created a entirely new marketplace that people have to compete in. So those things are constant things. You know, crime is going down, but it hasn't gone down for those who've lost their kids in gang fights and gun fights. So that as a community, we have all of these things to overcome, and it's very difficult to have vision for one without protecting the economic base for all.
Well, if I might, let's focus on education. As you're aware, there's been a big argument concerning charter schools versus public schools, etc., and I'm wondering how you line up on that.
Well, I don't think that any parent should deny their child a better education, no matter what you call it, whether it's a charter school in the public school system or a traditional school. Even politicians that have opposed this type of thing have been the beneficiaries of better schools than those exist in the traditional public schools. Having said that, I have said that when you say leave no child behind, that includes the traditional schools. It's just not right that the charter schools benefit at the expense of our traditional public schools. If they're able to do things that the public schools are not doing, and it seems to be successful, then the public schools, the traditional public schools, ought to do it. But I just don't think that we have the luxury of saying that we can't find a way to have schools that are doing better than the traditional schools. Resources, to me, is the key. And charter schools have managed to get private resources other than just monies that come from the governments. But that notwithstanding, we have to find a way not to have an economic gap in resources if we're going to train our kids for the future.
Okay. Which takes me back to something we covered earlier, jobs. That seems to be the biggest concern for our community. What do you see happening in Harlem specifically that will lead towards the creation of more jobs?
We have to really get our school system geared to the needs of the talent that's there. I mean, we just can't send kids to school and at the end of the day at graduation they don't have particular skills. Now, we do know that if you really want to be assured that you're going to have a job, that the health industry, because of the Obama health reform plan, is going to provide opportunities everywhere. Right now we feel in the crunch of the budget. But as more people become eligible for health care, and that doesn't mean being a psychiatrist or a doctor or a surgeon, it just means working in clinics, providing care for people before they get sick, the so-called wellness programs and preventing people from getting sick. And of course, in the long run, if America is going to survive against the Chinese and the Indians, we have to find alternatives to dependency on gasoline. And we have to find a new green economy that conserves electricity and conserves energy. This may sound like Flash Gordon did to me when I was a kid, like it was something way out in space and it didn't relate to me. But even though we don't find the cooperation of the Republicans in the House or the Senate, the truth of the matter is that whether we're talking about finding these alternatives because of climate control and the damage that we're doing to the planet, or whether we're just talking about the limited resources that we have in oil and the need to go into wind, into water, into solar, these things the Chinese are really moving into. And that's why America really has to invest in its schools, because we cannot maintain our leadership without being able to depend on other fuels. Oil is very limited. As a matter of fact, depending on oil has caused us to lose thousands of young people who find themselves in a war that if it wasn't for oil they would not be involved in. And so for a variety of reasons we can't let oil dictate our foreign policy or peace or war. So we have to make certain that the schools are geared toward the future and not just McDonald's and fast food places.
I agree wholeheartedly, but one of the arguments in this whole charter school versus public school was the infusion of private capital in charter schools. Now, it occurred to me that if the public schools, and I agree with you, as you stated earlier, everyone should, no child left behind should mean exactly that. But if I'm a businessman and I see that kids are not being educated to the degree that it can help me as a business, then it almost seems to me that it behooves me to invest in my future employees so that they are, trained in such a way that it would be helpful to what I'm doing. And that was my take on private capital funding charter schools, etc. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I don't know about locally, but certainly when